Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be discussing the case of a woman who, while 7.5 months pregnant, vanished after last being seen at a local mall. With very little clues, barely any leads, and the public's focus aimed towards another case of a young girl who went missing the same day, this case would soon go cold. But in 1996, a dogged private investigator would take on the case pro bono, and decades later, he's still pushing for answers. Today's case is part 1 of the disappearance of Sandra Sollie. On June 2, 1994, 38-year-old Sandra Sollie missed paying her rent. Her landlord, a man named Jay, was particularly concerned because this was totally out of the ordinary for her. She was a very responsible and punctual person. Sandra had been living in the upstairs unit of a 2-story duplex located at 11 State Route 350 in Macedon, New York, that this guy Jay owned. She'd been residing there since around 1989 after she'd gotten divorced from her now ex-husband, Ralph Sollie Jr. But Sandra was the type that was never late when it came to her rent payments, so that sparked immediate concern for Jay. And he was actually the first person to contact police about Sandra's potential disappearance due to the fact that she hadn't even given him a heads up that she might not be paying rent on time that month and then subsequently missed making the payment. Jay described Sandra as a very tidy and organized person who would contact him for even the smallest of things, like, for example, if she was going to be away for a few days. So for her not to reach out beforehand and then miss this rent payment altogether made him pretty uneasy. So, like I said, Jay contacted police, I'm assuming for probably some sort of well-being check, and that same day, June 2nd, he, along with the chief of the Macedon Police Department at the time, John Ellis, went into Sandra's apartment to see if she was there, to see if things were maybe out of place or ransacked, or to see if something may have happened to her. And with Jay being the owner, he had a key and could easily let the chief in to take a quick look around. Upon their arrival, they found that the door to Sandra's unit had been locked and her gold Honda sedan was sitting seemingly untouched in the driveway. Inside the apartment, nothing appeared to be disturbed. Her apartment was neat and clean and there didn't appear to have been any sort of struggle. But Sandra was nowhere to be found. There were also a few other things missing. Her purse, as well as her 6-year-old gray or dark brown poodle, Jessie, along with the dog's collar and leash, were missing. Now, the details of exactly how and when Sandra was reported missing are a little fuzzy. It seems as though a couple of different things could have transpired. Either Jay officially reported her missing, her neighbors did after they hadn't seen or heard from her for several days after this, I guess you would call it, well-being check, and they were particularly friendly, so that would make sense, or her family may have filed the report. Either way, sometime between that June 2nd date when the chief and Jay went into her apartment and June 6th, Sandra Sollie was officially reported missing.
All right. First instinct. Took the dog for a walk. Maybe abducted on the walk.
Possible.
Okay.
Now, I do want to back up a little bit and discuss when Sandra was actually last seen, and I want to go over a few other details before we really dive into the investigation that ensued after she was officially reported missing. Most of this information did appear to be uncovered once authorities got involved, but I do feel it necessary that you know some of these things up front before we dive into the searches that took place, leads that came in, witness statements, etc. So, first and foremost, I want to make it known that Sandra Sollie was 7.5 months pregnant when she was reported missing, and on top of her not paying her rent or contacting any of her friends or family for days on end, she'd also missed 2 prenatal doctor appointments, and I'm assuming all of that coupled with the missed appointments is what really prompted those who knew her to finally report her missing, because that behavior was totally out of the ordinary.
So, how far before she was reported missing were those doctor's appointments?
So, come to find out, Sandra actually hadn't been seen or heard from since May 23rd.
Wow.
About 9 days prior to her missing that rent payment. So already, this entire investigation is way behind the 8 ball.
Right.
So in original reporting on the case, it was stated that Sandra had been last seen at her home around 2:30 p.m. on Monday, May 23rd. But later reporting, come 1996, 2 years after she initially vanished, there would be additional details revealed regarding her whereabouts on that day. So apparently, she'd made a trip to a department store in Macedon, located in I believe it was the Ames Plaza at the time, and today appears to be called the West Wayne Plaza on Route 31 in Macedon. After that, she traveled to a drugstore or pharmacy in the nearby town of Newark. Then she dropped off some clothes to a thrift store of sorts. And finally, she spent time with an elderly man who she often drove around while she ran errands. And I don't know if he ran these errands with her or what their general routine was, but the public was later made aware that that man who she'd driven around that day was a guy named Ed Miller, and he was potentially the very last person to see Sandra Sollie alive.
When you say elderly man, do we know?
Elderly.
Talking
Definitely
80?
older. Yeah, so probably not even close to thinking that he would have been involved.
Okay. So she probably takes him around to get him out of the house type thing?
I think so, yeah. I don't know if he was a neighbor of hers or if she just met him as she, lived in Macedon or what, but they became friendly and she would just kind of drive him around and run her errands and he probably just tagged along.
Cool.
Okay, so I think you have a fair amount of background info on Sandra at this point, but there are just a few more things that I want to tell you. As I already mentioned a few minutes ago, Sandra was divorced, and she actually lived alone in her duplex on State Route 350 in Macedon. She was employed, but at the time had been on a disability leave from her job at a company called Eastman Kodak Co., and in an oddly similar circumstance to the case we covered in our last episode, Sandra was also out of work due to a head injury, and she was also suffering from intense headaches. It's unclear exactly how she sustained that injury, which kept her out of work for an extended period of time, though. As I also mentioned before, Sandra was relatively far along in her pregnancy and was due to give birth to a baby boy whom she'd already named Brandon Michael, and her due date was August 15th, 1994. This was Sandra's first pregnancy, and she did not have any other children. Her family stated that she'd become a changed woman since falling pregnant, with her brother stating at one point, quote, "She said this was a miracle baby. She was like a new person," end quote. And Sandra appeared to be absolutely thrilled about the new baby and had a nursery all set up in her house and was always on time for her prenatal appointments. So the fact that she'd missed several of those was just another added layer to the level of concern felt by those who knew her when they couldn't get in touch with her after the 23rd.
So was the baby her ex-husband's?
We don't know.
Okay.
Now, you might also be asking how it had taken so long for Sandra to be reported missing or for anyone to become particularly worried about her. And honestly, I really just don't have an answer to that question, but based on what I've been able to uncover about her as a person, it seemed as though she was quite a homebody, and it's very possible she just didn't communicate with her friends and loved ones on an everyday basis. And if she didn't call or see someone for a few days, I have to think that this just wasn't a totally strange thing for her. And the other thing is, she didn't live very close to her family. She'd been living in Macedon for the past 5 years at the very least, but I think it was closer to maybe 8 to 10 years in total because she had been living with Ralph in a property he owned in Macedon when they were married. So she had been living away from her family for a number of years. She did grow up in Oakfield, Genesee County with her parents, Nancy and Dominic, and her 4 siblings. And she was actually the youngest and had 1 older sister and 3 older brothers. And Oakfield, where most of her family was still living, was about an hour drive from Macedon. So it just wasn't very close. It's not like they would just pop over randomly to say hi.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't talk to people on an everyday basis, the people that would most likely be concerned for not seeing you for an extended period of time would either be your neighbors or your coworkers.
Yep.
And she wasn't working. And I mean, it also wasn't like months long. It was 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, at that point, you would have to think, especially with neighbors and stuff, they'll probably be a little concerned for like a few days after that.
Yeah, I mean, when our neighbors go away, we're like, oh, we haven't seen them in a couple of days. They must have gone away.
Yeah, but then like thinking about it, they see that her car is still there. They're thinking, oh, June 1st is coming up. I know Jay is probably going to stop by to pick up the rent or something, and she'll probably give that to him. So, you know, we'll just wait until then. And I feel like people kind of give excuses to say like why she might show up later.
The bystander effect.
Yes, exactly.
Who lived on the first floor?
That I'm not sure. I do know that she was friendly with the people who lived in the other unit or potentially other units.
Okay.
Okay, so at this point, I think we can move on to the details of the investigation into Sandra's disappearance. As soon as she'd been reported missing, a description of her was put out to the public. She was described as a white female who was 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighed approximately 160 pounds, had brown hair and brown eyes, a birthmark on her abdomen, a scar on her upper lip, pierced ears, and she was very clearly pregnant. Due to the fact that Sandra's dog was also missing and was more than likely with her, it was also reported that her dark brown or dark gray poodle was last seen wearing a bright blue canvas collar. And pretty much right after the missing persons report was filed, the Macedon Police Department called in the state police to assist, and from there, intense searches of the area began to take place.
I assume they're probably thinking the same thing. Dog's missing, leash is missing, car's still there, door's locked. She probably left for a walk.
Yeah.
So let's start looking in the general area where somebody would leave to walk their dog.
Yep, exactly. Now, before we dive into the details of the search, if you haven't already, John, I want you to take a look at where Sandra's apartment was, and I'll actually send you a link now to the area so you can get a good idea of just how wooded and rural this place was.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you were to just do an overhead look of this and ask somebody, where do you think this is from?
Mm-hmm.
You would guess like Idaho or Nebraska, like a flyover state.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when we say New York, we think of city.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not the case here. I mean, when you zoom out a fair bit, it looks like fields and farms, kind of. Just big plots of land, even today.
Yep.
Without a lot of infrastructure.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it looks like upstate New York, not like totally way up there, but definitely.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean,
rural.
there's only one main drag, it seems, which is Route 31.
Yes. And the thing that's weird, too, though, is like it's such an obscure location for a house, like where this is located.
Yeah, huh? It is. I mean, on the pin, it doesn't even show a house. I assume it's probably that white thing next to it.
That's what I would think. But again, this is like almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a very strange location. I almost wonder if it's the ones on the corner there because it looks like,
yeah, it might be,
two maybe duplexes or something like that side by side. But it's also interesting because you said Route 31 and I was like, wait a second, she lived on State Route 350. So I think 350 turned into 31 because if you zoom in closer, it shows that it's State Route 350. Like right in front of that white building.
Oh, yeah, huh? There's 31F and 350.
Yeah, so it's like this
That's
very
strange.
obscure location. And, she's right next to this massive body of water, which you come to find out later is the Erie Canal.
Yep.
And, there's tons and tons of woods all around. I mean, this is definitely like rural. And if something happened to her, would probably be somewhat difficult to find her.
Yeah.
And would probably take time, a lot of resources.
Yeah. Even outside of the Erie Canal,
Mm-hmm.
you travel, a short distance north, you have Lake Ontario.
Yep, exactly. So at this point, when the searches were beginning, it was around June 6th or 7th, so nearly 2 weeks now after Sandra had been last seen. Senior investigator William Bowling with the state police was heading up the searches and the investigation as a whole, and he actually worked on the case for a number of years. The initial search efforts were pretty intense, with officers from neighboring towns, the state police, and volunteer firefighters searching by foot, with helicopters and divers being utilized to search these nearby waterways. At the time, the Democrat and Chronicle reported, quote, Macedon Police Chief John Ellis said there has never been a search of this magnitude in the village. It's a priority, he said. We'll run it for the duration. We'll track down everything we can, end quote. And one area in particular that was being heavily scoured by volunteers and authorities was this path along the Erie Canal, which ran pretty much like right, I guess you would call it parallel to where the duplex she lived in was located. And she would often walk her dog, Jessie, along this path. So this was an excellent starting point considering this was a regular routine of hers. Now, the majority of the searches appeared to be taking place in Macedon, which was in Wayne County. But there were some reports of searches taking place in the Rochester area as well, which was about 19 miles or a 25 to 30-minute drive northwest of Macedon. About a week after the searches began, there was also reporting of additional searches happening at a location near Panorama Plaza in Penfield. And Penfield was about 13 miles or a 20-minute drive northwest. And another location in Rochester, supposedly near Hudson Ave and Reed Park, was also being searched. Regardless, according to the reporting at the time, the searches were, quote, fruitful, with authorities only stating that some personal belongings of Sandra's were located at a car wash, which I believe did come from the search of the plaza in the Penfield area. So remember, if they're finding personal items of hers, that is roughly 20 minutes away from where she was last seen.
Right.
And her car is at her home. So that's something to just keep in mind. Authorities would not divulge any additional details, at least in the beginning, other than saying that there were some personal belongings of hers that they found. But at this point in the investigation, after this intensive searching, authorities had deemed her disappearance, quote-unquote, suspicious. So it didn't appear as though they believed her to have just walked off.
Especially finding her belongings, 12 miles. I don't know many people that would take their dog on a 12-mile daily walk. 24 miles going there and back.
While you're 7.5 months pregnant.
Right, exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
And I mean, Penfield is also on the way to Rochester.
Correct.
Oftentimes we associate more crime in cities, and interesting that it's going more towards that direction.
Yeah, and you would have to think, I guess it brings me back to Elizabeth Berquist's case as well, with that, weird similarity with the head injury, but also with where her skull ended up being found. It was like, I think it was driving south. So then you would think in this instance, if something happened to Sandra, where they're thinking more than likely it had, that this person probably just went northwest through Penfield, up through Rochester, and then maybe, drove back down. But you're thinking if you're trying to get rid of things or hide evidence or whatever it is, that you're probably not going to stay in the area where whatever happened.
Right, most likely.
Now, also during this time, authorities were receiving tips and leads and were conducting interviews with Sandra's friends and family to see what other clues they might be able to uncover about what could have happened to her. It was reported that they were utilizing her address book as well as her answering machine to try and find any contacts she may have had that they could bring in for interviews. Investigator Bowling told the Democrat and Chronicle they, quote, received some decent information, but hadn't questioned any person more than one time. But after several weeks of searching and further investigation, authorities did confirm they were bringing in some people they'd already spoken to be questioned again. It seemed as though a lot of the leads they'd gotten just really weren't panning out, so I think they probably wanted more detail from the people they might have been more interested in scrutinizing a bit more, so they were bringing those folks in for additional interviews.
Did they ever release what personal belongings were found in Penfield?
They do later, yes, but I'm not going to release that to you yet.
Okay.
So in terms of trying to locate Sandra, when they hadn't found her in their searches of the area, they began contacting area hospitals and were asking them to reach back out to investigators if they ever admitted any patients that might have matched Sandra's description. Because at this point, of course, as days keep going by, she's getting closer and closer to her due date. On top of that, they were also contacting area vets, animal hospitals, shelters, and the public as a whole to see if anyone had located Sandra's missing poodle, or even if someone, in the general public had found the dog and brought it into their home, anything like that, they wanted someone to reach out, if they had seen the dog too, even if they didn't see Sandra.
So I'm guessing they didn't find the dog in Penfield.
Correct.
Okay.
Nope, it was not the dog.
I was wondering if the dog showed up at a shelter or something.
Yeah, nope, nothing like that. But very soon after the investigation started, authorities hit on something I would consider to be a pretty big lead. It was discovered that at least one of Sandra's credit cards had been used upwards of 14 times from May 26th, 3 days after she was supposedly last seen, to May 31st, with the charges totaling up to $1,100.
I wonder what they were used for.
Well, I'm going to tell you.
All right.
So one of her cards had been used at the Marketplace Mall in Henrietta, and then also at a Wegmans food market in 2 different locations, one of which being in Midtown. Now, the mall was about 18 miles or a 35-minute drive west of where Sandra's home was located.
Towards Penfield?
Sort of, yeah. So Penfield was
in
more
the direction,
northwest.
At least.
Exactly, yes. But some of these purchases that were being made on her cards were for things that Sandra more than likely would not have been buying, like beer and cigarettes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I would have imagined.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking more like things that you could get at gas stations.
Yeah.
Because it's just easy to go and swipe whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But.
And then thinking, too, if there were personal belongings found at that car wash,
Yeah.
could it have been somewhere near there or at a place similar to that? What kind of personal belongings did they find? Was it her credit card? Was it her wallet? Who knows?
Right.
But come to find out, it wasn't actually Sandra using the cards at all. I think you probably could have imagined that. And there were actually 2 separate groups of people that had utilized her credit cards. The first charges I mentioned were made by 3 men, and they also had made purchases at a men's clothing store on top of the other purchases of the beer and cigarettes. And according to reporting done in the Democrat and Chronicle, authorities said, quote, 3 men were together when the card was used on at least 2 occasions, including when $270 was charged at Jason's men's shop, 732 Joseph Ave, end quote. And then it's later reported another card, so this was a different credit card altogether, and that was used by a woman at an Accent fashion store located on 216 East Main Street, and then also at a Rite Aid location where the woman purchased allergy medication. And that woman was not Sandra, totally different woman.
How did they track all these people down? Surveillance?
There ended up being surveillance footage in some of the locations, and I think they got some descriptions from the clerks who had made the purchases for them, so...
I also find it strange, too, unless it was like this group of guys just going from store to store and all the purchases were made the same day.
Yeah.
I can probably count on one hand how many times me and 3 guys all went shopping together.
Multiple times. You go to a Wegmans, you go to a men's clothing shop, you go to a liquor store or whatever. Like, it's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think at least one or maybe even several of the times they were all together.
Strange.
Yeah, it's very odd. And at the time, it was completely unclear how the 3 men and this other woman obtained any of Sandra's cards, but it was a big lead that authorities needed to work through to the end to figure out how it all fit into this story. And you might also be hoping that, you know, as I just mentioned, with there being a potential description from the clerks who had seen the people make the purchases, you know, that maybe a description would be put out to the public so that they could try and help authorities track these people down.
Right.
But due to the fact that they didn't have too much information to go off of just yet, when it was first reported anyway, investigator Bowling stated that it would be, quote, speculative to give any sort of description at the time. But he said that they were planning to review all the surveillance footage in some of the stores and were hoping that with that at their disposal, they could just track down these people, question them about the card usage and, you know, where they found the cards in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's speculative to want to, you know,
Describe
gather
these people.
information about these people and put it out to the public.
Yeah, I wonder if it was like they wanted to get their own description by looking at the footage and make sure it matched what the clerks said so that
That's
they weren't
fair.
putting out erroneous information.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. But thankfully, by roughly June 11th or 12th, authorities had located the men and the woman and were able to figure out how the story of how they got Sandra's cards went. So apparently, a 9-year-old boy had located a wallet in a bunch of bushes, also described in the press as a hedgerow, on North Street in Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want you to take North Street as the be-all, end-all of exactly where this wallet was found, because I have seen a lot of differing reporting on where the wallet was located. North Street, of course, was one of them, yes, but earlier, I had made mention of searches that were happening in Rochester near Hudson Ave and potentially even Reed Park, and those were seemingly connected to this whole situation. So it's very possible the wallet was found on one of those streets. And all of these locations are exceptionally close to each other. Reed Park is literally a cross street with North Street, and then Hudson Ave isn't too far either. So I think we know the general area of where the wallet was found, just not like an exact pinpointed location.
Sure, I think general is just as good.
Yeah, agreed.
My question is, are there any links from like a relationship standpoint between the woman, the boy who found the wallet, and the 3 men?
No, I don't think so. But there is a little bit more detail that I'm going to tell you in just a minute. But I do want to touch on the point that we know that there were these searches happening. We were just talking about how, you know, she goes missing in Macedon, then they find something in Penfield, and now they're finding her wallet in Rochester. So this is 35 minutes to the west or northwest of where she was last seen.
Right.
So I think this just goes to, you know, our point before of, are you trying to get rid of stuff and you're driving, you know, in this westward direction and like dropping off
Dumping it
personal belongings in different places? Because we know there were things found at the car wash, and now we know that her wallet's found, you know, in another town even further away.
Right, but I mean, investigators, look at what I said earlier, right?
Yeah.
Penfield is on the direction to Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
We associate cities with more crime. Like if you're trying to dump stuff and you're leaving a little trail of breadcrumbs and, you drop stuff in Penfield and then more stuff is found or more clues are found in Rochester later on, you're essentially leading investigators. Like if
but
you're going to
why?
be... Because you're stupid? I don't know.
Yeah, like what's the potential perpetrator's connection to Rochester? Like why go that way? Why drop stuff
They're probably going back
there?
home or something.
I mean, maybe.
Maybe. Also, because it keeps popping up into my head.
Mm-hmm.
Who finds a wallet and they're like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go spend some money on this person's credit card.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like this little kid found, a wristlet that had $500 in it.
That's
and there's no
different,
identifying markers or no way to get this back to the person. It's like, all right, well, I'll hold on to this for a little while. And then if anybody says, oh, I lost my wristlet and there was money in it, give it back to them.
Yeah.
It's
using a credit card versus using cash, you find, is very different. And obviously, like, this is a woman's card. This is a woman named Sandra.
right.
And you have 3 men going into department stores or whatever else using her card. I mean, unless you're her potential husband or boyfriend, like, you shouldn't be using her card. Like, it's obvious that this is sketchy, that you're using someone's card with a different name. And I don't know how much people scrutinize that back then.
Also, I'm thinking, too, if anybody listening knows the answer, I remember probably only doing this on Black Friday because our computer system went down like a decade plus ago when I worked at Best Buy. But what was the charge threshold where you had to, take the card, run it through with a carbon copy and make like a little imprint on the carbon copy to keep the receipt and stuff?
Yep.
Because if they could have just swiped the card or whatever and it wasn't looked at, it's whatever. But if they had to swipe it, give it to somebody, they had to inspect it, and they were like, oh, who's Sandra or whatever? What story could they have given to get away with it? Like, oh, it's my wife, she's in the bathroom or something.
Yeah, I wonder.
I don't know.
It's kind of like how they use that little yellow marker on $100 bills, but they're not going to check if a 20's fake.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like that situation.
Here's $1,001 bills.
And they're like, well, okay, this must be good then.
Right.
Imagine a poor cashier having to sit there counting out $1,001 bills.
And swiping it with the pen.
Oh my God. I've definitely sat there and experienced someone paying in change.
Yes, I've seen that too.
Like paying like $20 in quarters or nickels or something. I'm like, oh.
At least roll it.
Right? Exactly. Oh, those poor cashiers, they have to go through a lot. But anyway, after these card thieves were located, they were said to all be cooperating with the investigation. And after an exhaustive look into them, it was ruled out that the 3 men and 1 woman had absolutely no involvement in Sandra's disappearance. And much, much later on in reporting, like literally decades down the line, the Pocono Record stated the following regarding this whole situation with the stolen credit cards.
The Pocono Record.
I know.
Freaking place.
That place haunts me. But it said, quote, it was later established by police that the credit cards had been found on Reed Street in the city of Rochester by a young child. The child gave the credit cards to a parent, and the parent gave them to a friend who ended up using them, according to Lieutenant Barry Chase of the New York State Police. That lead was looked into at the time, back in 1994, and we believe that the person who used the credit card had no connection whatsoever, Chase said, end quote.
It would take a stupid criminal, like a really stupid criminal, to have something to do with Sandra's disappearance and then to take her credit cards and use them.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So, as much as you would hope that this big lead could end in finding Sandra, it unfortunately really went nowhere. Then, a very important date came and went, Sunday, June 12th, 1994. And this was the date that Sandra's baby shower was supposed to be held. Her mother had planned it for her, and once that day came and there was still no sign of Sandra, everyone was pretty convinced that something sinister had likely taken place. So,
it took that long to realize it?
Well, I mean, you're only about
3 weeks.
Well, 3 weeks after she's last seen, but like a week and a half after she's reported missing.
I know. And as a family member, you're always going to remain hopeful.
Absolutely.
That somebody's going to come back. But,
yep.
This person hasn't been seen or heard from in 3 weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she's supposed to have her baby shower today.
If someone hadn't been seen or heard from in 3 days, I'd be like, that's it. Like something bad has happened.
Send out the
no
troops.
Way. Absolutely. So now that they're leaning more along the lines of foul play, not that they weren't before, but still, authorities mentioned just a little tidbit of something to the media about what they thought might have occurred the day she disappeared. Quote, "We're definitely under the impression that she left the residence with somebody she knew. She would not usually take her dog unless she knew the person that she went with," end quote. And from what I understand, the reason that they're putting so much stock in the dog has to do with its behavior.
Vicious.
Yeah, so I actually located an interview on some sort of show. I don't know if it was like a radio show or a podcast from years ago, but I found the transcripts of it. And it's called Missing Pieces. And the host spoke with a PI who took her case on later on down the line. And according to that interview, Sandra's dog didn't take too kindly to strangers. He wasn't particular, at least I think it was a boy. I'm not 100% positive, but I think...
Blue collar, probably.
Yeah, so he wasn't particularly friendly and might even snap at people here and there. So for Sandra's car to still have been at the house, she clearly didn't take a walk because they didn't find any indication of her or any of her belongings. And her dog is now nowhere to be found. I mean, it's suspicious, and it's probably what led authorities to believe if she left the house, she had to have gone in someone else's car.
Mm-hmm.
She had to have gone, obviously, with somebody else. And why is she going to take the dog with a stranger when they don't like strangers? It had to be someone that Sandra knew and the dog knew.
Yeah, it all makes sense. And this is assuming that she did leave with someone.
Yes.
Perhaps she didn't walk the dog regularly being this far along in pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm all on board. That sounds like it makes sense.
I agree. Yeah. Now, I know John already asked this question, and it's probably something that a lot of people still have in the back of their head, and that's more than likely, who the heck is the father of Sandra's baby? There's been so much talk about this pregnancy, now this missed baby shower, but we don't know anything about who the father might be. Well, at that point in time, in 1994, I don't think many people really knew who the father could have been. There is some speculation, though, that we are going to talk about by the end of this episode. But for now, in keeping with the timeline, that's all I'm going to reveal.
Is there any chance that this was an affair happening at work with a married man?
I mean, there's always a chance of everything,
Yeah.
but I haven't heard anything specifically about that.
Okay.
But okay, so let's now fast forward to the end of June 94, and there was some additional information released regarding someone else that may have been one of the last people to at least talk to Sandra. We had known before about the elderly man, Ed, but there was also someone else that spoke to her on the morning of May 23rd. Her friend, Sandy Krowecki, I think is how you pronounce her last name, she had spoken to her that morning, and before the two hung up, Sandra had told her that she would call her back later that night, but that call never came. So I think it's pretty fair to say that whatever happened to Sandra Sollie happened sometime in the afternoon or early evening hours of May 23rd, 94. She doesn't appear to have been seen or spoken to by anyone else after that. That's at least verifiable. And her credit card started to be used by other people only 3 short days later. So you have to assume the 23rd does feel like the day whatever happened, happened.
Yeah, and if you don't want to put your stake in the 23rd, it happened in that 3-day period.
Agreed. Yep. Now, by the end of June, Sandra's family had put together a $10,000 reward for information in the case that would lead to the location of Sandra. And authorities had also put her information in both statewide and national databases so that if she were to turn up anywhere else, whether alive or deceased, they'd have an easier time locating her. Then, about a week later, around July 6th or July 8th, 1994, a call came into police just before 7 p.m. from a woman who stated she saw a body floating in the Erie Canal, quote, behind the Cannery Row shopping plaza on Route 31, end quote, which was roughly 12 miles or like an 18-minute drive from Sandra's home.
The way water was flowing, I wonder?
Unsure.
Down river? Down canal?
Possibly. And you have to think, she did also go shopping on Route 31 the day she was last seen. That was something that was mentioned as well.
Mm-hmm. But she talked on the phone after that, right?
Before that.
Oh, before.
She was supposedly last seen around 2:30 p.m. on the 23rd, but I don't know who that sighting came from, like whether it was a neighbor or if it was Ed, like if he was like, oh, she dropped me off and then left, and that was the last time I saw her, maybe something like that.
Yep. Do we know where Ed lived?
Not sure, unfortunately.
All right.
Now, there was one report about this woman that called in seeing the body that said that the body was supposedly decapitated, but it's not totally clear how accurate that is, and I only saw it in like one spot, so I don't know, take that with a grain of salt. And I don't know if the caller stated whether the body they spotted was male or female either, but at the time it was reported that Sandra Sollie had been the only person reported missing in Macedon. But investigators, of course, didn't know if this call was connected to her case because they didn't know anything about this body that supposedly was floating in the canal. They did take it very seriously, though, and searched the canal for about an hour the night the call came in. And you have to think it's, probably starting to get dark at that point. But they did end up returning the following morning to search for an additional 6 hours with 4 state police divers. Unfortunately, neither of those searches resulted in any body being found. The Democrat and Chronicle reported at the time, quote, "Divers said the current in the canal primarily flows to the east, but shifts back and forth as the locks in Palmyra and Newark are opened. Lock tenders have been alerted and are asking boaters to be on the lookout for anything floating along the shore," end quote. So even though they didn't locate anything, they were alerting people who worked in the area and along the canal to keep an eye out for anything suspicious.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just strange. I don't know, you would think if someone's calling in saying hey, I saw a body, and they go over there immediately, wouldn't you think you'd find the body?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think too, who is this person that's making the call?
Mm-hmm.
How good is their vision? How old are they? Could they be playing a prank? Could it have been a floating log and not a body?
I mean, maybe, but okay, let's keep going because I have a little more info for you to kind of go along with what you just said.
All right.
So after searching for this extended period of time and attempting to track down the location of the phone in which the tipster called from with no luck, investigators actually reached out to the media in hopes of being able to get back in touch with that caller. Due to the fact that they weren't able to trace the phone back, authorities believe the woman had reached out to them via payphone. But they did say that they felt like the caller was being genuine and said, quote, "She didn't sound like the typical crank caller," end quote.
Okay.
And what's also kind of odd is that there had been calls about a deceased dog that had been located at one point as well before this call about the body came in. And that call, I think, had come in about 2 to 3 weeks prior to this one. But it was stated that a dog matching Jesse's description was found in the Genesee River near the Stetson Street Bridge. And if you remember Genesee, that's the county where Sandra had grown up.
Mm-hmm.
But investigator Bowling later stated regarding if the dog was Jesse or not, quote, "After closer inspection, a connection was ruled out," end quote.
Seems like every now and then there are hints that we may be getting somewhere, and then upon further investigation, it just goes nowhere.
That's literally this entire case. It's definitely frustrating.
Well, it shows perseverance on the investigators' behalf. Because
for sure.
Every time they get a little something, they're like, oh, yeah, it might be here.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not. But every time they get something new, they still look into it. So,
yeah, I think that just shows that you've got a dedicated officer working on the case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have to say, when I first began researching this case, to me, there appeared to be a fair amount of reporting regarding her case. And after, Sandra first went missing, I was finding a decent influx of articles. But that's also me looking back on this reporting 29 years in the future. And I truly have no idea what was actually being broadcast on TV, what was really getting the attention of locals, all that. But come to find out, there was actually another case at the time that was getting a lot more attention, far more than Sandra's. And strangely enough, this other girl went missing on the exact same day that Sandra did. And I mean, come on, because of that odd circumstance, authorities are of course going to look into a connection. But I will tell you straight off the bat, doesn't appear as though there's any sort of link between the two. However, there was I guess I'll call it a mundane connection. And apparently Sandra had been somewhat of an acquaintance with this missing girl's father. How I understand it, she and that girl's dad had met in a Rochester bar a few years back, but I don't believe they were particularly friendly with each other after meeting, and authorities deemed that potential link between the cases, quote, purely coincidental.
I wonder how much stake we can put in that. Because there are still so many unanswered questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know who the baby's father is.
Mm-hmm.
We find out that this girl goes missing the same day that Sandra went missing.
Mm-hmm.
We find out that Sandra was an acquaintance with her or her father, met her father in a bar.
Mm-hmm.
How long ago did they meet together in a bar?
Mm-hmm.
Could it have been 7.5 months prior to her disappearance?
I think it was years, honestly. Okay. So, yeah. And I think that's why, of course, people are going to speculate about that and be like, oh my God, is there this, even deeper connection or, whatever, but it didn't appear as though there was. And I'm pretty sure, John, you have not heard of this other case because I feel like there's many true crime cases
I don't know
that
a lot of them.
Yeah, other than the ones that everybody knows. But I am curious if our listeners are familiar with it. And it's the case of Callie Poulton, a 4-year-old girl who went missing on May 23rd, 1994 in Rochester, New York. Her disappearance grabbed the attention of the local area immediately. She'd been reported missing, I'm pretty sure, literally within an hour, maybe even a half hour of when she went missing. And authorities and locals were all over the case in an instant. And I mean, you can't really help but kind of compare that and how sad it is that it took 9 days for Sandra to be reported missing. And then you have everyone just jumping on this other case within an hour. But you also have to think, there are clearly differences here. This is a 4-year-old girl versus an adult woman. This is, a mother who's frantically freaking out. She knows her kid was just outside and now she's not. Yeah. So I can see why there's a difference in at least reporting them missing.
Right. I mean, even if this was, a 16-year-old girl that went missing, it would be drastically different than a 4-year-old.
Absolutely.
Because this was still in the time, obviously things were getting better in 94, but this is still the time where it's they're young, they just ran away, blah, blah, blah. So now, like you were saying, they're drastically different when you have a 4-year-old that disappeared that the mother just knew where they were versus, an adult female that just hasn't been seen or heard from. Yes, they're both serious, but obviously people are going to latch onto that 4-year-old as, somebody took them or
they wandered off and could have fallen in the water.
Exactly. Yep. So, and you also, too, not to defend police because obviously we've seen many cases where they weren't doing a great job or they hadn't done the best that they could have. But in this respect, if you have, all hands on deck working to find this 4-year-old, who knows how slim their resources could have been to also split up and start looking for Sandra at the same time.
Yeah. Maybe and they were already looking for Callie for, 2 weeks before Sandra.
Right.
Or Sandra's searches started.
Right.
There was also a lot of community involvement to try and find Callie. There were tons of donations, tens of thousands of dollars in reward money, flyers plastered everywhere, the media covering the case constantly, etc., etc. And Sandra's case just did not garner that same level of attention. And when asked about the difference in why more people were concerned about Callie's case and not Sandra's, it's kind of along the same lines of what John and I have been talking about. And investigator Bowling replied with, quote, "People immediately get concerned over the disappearance of a child. A child can wander off, and there are a lot of reasons a child can be taken," end quote. And the Democrat and Chronicle also reported the following kind of in the same vein, quote, "Senior investigator William Bowling of the state police, who was heading the investigation of Sollie's disappearance, said he's not surprised at the lack of outrage over Sollie's vanishing. He said many adults reported missing have just gone away and later turn up safe. Yet, he added, I'm surprised with her being pregnant, there wasn't more interest. But a missing adult just does not generate human sympathy. Most people don't get that excited. People should," end quote.
Yeah, I totally agree with what he said.
Yeah, I feel like Investigator Bowling is one of those detectives, that we agree with a lot of what he's saying, what he's putting out to the public, how he's doing his investigation. And I feel like we have a good mix of both good and bad investigators in the cases we cover.
Yeah, I think he's a good one.
Agreed.
I think he uses common sense. I don't think that he's fluffing his responses for the media. Agreed. I think whatever he says, he actually means.
I agree, yeah. To also go back to your point too, John, about the amount of investigators that may have been, working on Callie's case and then who you're going to pull and work on Sandra's case and things like that. When Sandra first went missing, there were 10 investigators working her case. And for Callie's case, there were 25 teams of troopers.
Right.
So you can see the massive, massive difference in the level of, I guess, law enforcement presence. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
Also, too, you want to think, sure, there were 10 investigators working Sandra's case, but that the inner conversation with all the PDs and everybody involved is we got to find this girl.
Yeah.
So even though they are looking for Sandra, that they also want to be the ones that can bring this 4-year-old back. So
yeah, and you can just imagine, probably family frustration,
Absolutely.
Things like that. But it was reported that Bowling could have asked for more assistance. He could have asked for additional officers or whatever else, but he said he just didn't know what he would have even done with the additional help.
Right.
What is it that they could have even worked on? Where could they search that hadn't already been searched before? And right after Sandra had gone missing, Bowling had stated, quote, "We've been working on this investigation now for over a week and only developed 135 leads. Callie develops that in half a day," end quote. So, I mean, it's clear.
But that's also because
difference.
of society.
Oh, of course,
Leads
yeah.
come in from the public. If everybody in this area is wrapped up in this 4-year-old girl's case versus Sandra's case, that's why you're getting all of these tips and leads. Where if Sandra's was the only one that was being publicized, the only one that happened around that time, you would probably be getting a lot more leads.
For sure. I totally agree. And also to go back to the whole, comment about potential family frustration, they actually didn't seem to have many issues with the work the police were doing and, the searches that they were conducting, everything that they were doing to try and track down leads, all of that. They seemed to be pretty pleased with the work the authorities were doing, at least in the beginning. And I think they kind of just understood there wasn't too much to go on. The investigation had a late start. There weren't a ton of leads coming in. But I think the frustration for the family was more so with the public at large. And they're like, well, why aren't you interested in my loved one?
Right.
She should be just as important. I get that there's a difference in age, but technically you have two people missing. You have a mother and her unborn child. And, I can absolutely put myself or attempt to put myself in their shoes and feel that intense frustration over, like, what the heck, guys? Why aren't there flyers of Sandra everywhere? Why aren't there donations to her reward, Yeah,
I totally agree with you.
Now, something else that was mentioned regarding this potential lack of interest in Sandra's case, at least in, the public at large, was, quote, "One reason for the lack of community action could be that Sollie didn't have strong ties to the community," Bowling said. Her family lives near Batavia. She was unemployed, lived alone, and was considered a homebody. Before she was pregnant, she enjoyed meeting friends in bars, a lifestyle some might not approve of, he said, end quote. But what I found to be particularly interesting is that Sandra's father actually ended up saying at one point that over the years, Sandra had made plenty of friends in the Macedon area. And I mean, we know she was friendly with that man, Ed. She was friendly with her neighbors. And she had been living in the area for like 8 to 10 years by the time she disappeared. And her dad had also mentioned that she was, quote, well-known and well-liked. And on top of all of that, based on reporting anyway, there were a lot of Sandra's friends that were being interviewed. We already knew about Sandy. She had other friends that were being talked to. So I don't know how much I necessarily agree with that statement. I think that's probably the first one from Bowling that I was like, really? Everyone else is saying that, like, she was really friendly, she was well-liked, she knew a lot of people.
I get that, but also this is not being dismissive of the family's claims or anything.
Yeah.
But when the family is saying, oh, she had all these friends, this, that, the other, I mean, when you're making friends at bars and you only see each other at bars, it's like, is that a friend that you're going to spend time with outside of the bar, or did you just meet each other there? Are you just, friendly with them because you frequent the same establishment?
Well, I'll play devil's advocate with you then, because her friend Sandy Krowecki, that woman that, we had talked about a little while earlier, she and Sandra had met in a bar. And they were like the best of friends, and they did keep in touch. So I think it's possible. But I get what you're saying. The majority of the time, it's just like acquaintances.
Right. It's people that you will see and talk to when you're at the bar.
Yeah.
It's not people that you're going to spend a ton of time with outside of the bar.
Yeah.
Except with maybe the Sandy connection and stuff like that. But
yeah.
I don't know. If she's a homebody, she hasn't been at work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think what Bowling said is totally reasonable. And like I said, he's not fluffing it for the media.
This is true.
By him saying that it's a lifestyle that not everybody may agree with or may look down upon, I mean, that's not wrong. It's not wrong to say that. Not everybody may agree with it, but some people may.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The public at large does look at these things, maybe with a tainted view.
And also, again, not to downplay all the great things and how she was this person and everybody said she had a ton of friends. Where were all these friends coming in with tips and helping to work the case and, giving information that they had?
If
she had all of these friends and they only ended up with 128 tips or whatever it was, and, the 4-year-old's case gets 128 in half a day, obviously they have the greater community at large giving all these tips and stuff too, but I just don't find it controversial, what he said.
I mean, I'm not saying I find it controversial. I was just saying, like, there's a clear difference between what
response.
He's saying and what family is saying about her community ties, really.
Yeah.
But about your whole thing with friends, like what are they doing, whatever. Well, Sandy, the same woman that we were talking about before, she and multiple other friends did step up to the plate, and she was kind of taking things into her own hands, and she began what the media was calling her own quote unquote publicity campaign. Mm-hmm. And she was able to get Sandra's employer, Eastman Kodak, to print posters with information about Sandra's case, and that was for free. She didn't have to pay for that. Mm-hmm. She was planning to have upwards of 1,000 flyers distributed to several neighboring towns, including Macedon. She was working to get T-shirt donations, to have her friend's picture put across the front, and info about her case printed on that to try and get even more, attention on her case. And they were asking for donations to add to, the reward fund, all of that. So she's out there. She's got, her hands in the pot, doing everything that she possibly can outside of what the police are already doing. So she's got people fighting for her. But things unfortunately began to really slow down in the case after the first few months, with authorities stating publicly that the amount of leads they had were dwindling quickly, but that they were still quote unquote optimistic. The number of officers working on the case had also decreased, down to 4 from the original 10 that had been assigned to it within the first days and weeks. Then August 15th, 1994 came and went, which was Sandra's due date to give birth to her son. And there were no reports at all about any woman giving birth at an area hospital that matched her description. There was still no sign of Sandra or her son, and her sister-in-law told the Democrat and Chronicle at the time, quote, "This is the delivery week. It has kind of sparked more emotions. It's just been a real tough week," end quote. And that same piece continues with her saying that they were, quote, "still hoping that something comes up. We're just hanging in there day by day," end quote.
Just a stupid question. Is there any reason why she would have wanted to run away to Canada?
Probably not. I don't think so, but who knows? Okay. Why do you ask that? Because it's close?
Yeah, I mean, you just go over the river and you're in Canada.
Over the river and through the woods?
Through the woods and over the river.
Does it go that way?
No, it's just, you would have to go through the woods to get to the lake.
Isn't that a song, though?
Over the river and through the woods. To grandmother's house we go.
Yes, that's the one.
I was just asking because it's only like 15 miles to Lake Ontario. You split Lake Ontario in half. Half is Canada, half is America, so.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think of that, but I don't know anything about any potential ties to Canada.
Okay.
Or reason to want to go there.
I was just thinking because of, they were looking at area hospitals.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Healthcare systems differ between the U.S. and Canada, obviously, so.
This is true.
There wouldn't be a connection there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good point, actually. Now, authorities had also gotten together during the month of August to try and, reconvene and go over everything they already had and do their best to brainstorm new ideas of just things to look into. But based on what was reported regarding that meeting, it appears as though none of those new ideas panned out. The following month, around mid-September of 1994, a very tragic and strange murder occurred that was surprisingly close to Sandra, and I guess you would call it her ex-family from when she was married before. So around September 14th, her 24-year-old ex-sister-in-law, Vicky, so her ex-husband's sister, was killed during an apparent robbery while she was with a 37-year-old man named Richard Snyder, whom I believe she was in a relationship with. The two had been robbed, and according to the Democrat and Chronicle piece that reported on a police report that was later filed in court regarding this case, they were, quote, "held against their will and transported to the rear of 219 Martin Street. Both victims were shot twice in the back of the head, causing their deaths," end quote.
Execution style.
Yeah. In terms of motive, quote, "police said the motive for the killings was robbery. The teenagers stole an unidentified amount of cash, a long rifle, and ammunition before shooting the victims. Police refused to say whether the victims were shot with the stolen rifle. Their bodies were discovered at 8 a.m. by a passerby in a fenced-in area near the old Bosch and Lomb plant. Investigators do not think drugs were involved," end quote. And according to that same reporting, 3 teenage suspects who were all under 18 were arrested. And investigators were searching for a 4th suspect that was potentially connected as well. From how I understand it, all 3 of the boys that had already been in custody had actually ended up admitting to killing both Vicky and Richard, and all 3, at least the ones that were arrested and allegedly confessed, were charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, as well as 2 counts of first-degree kidnapping and first-degree robbery. They later found the 4th suspect, who was 18 years old, and he was charged as well. Several of the boys pled guilty, and the 18-year-old was convicted of the murders after going to trial. Of course, Sandra's sister-in-law being murdered just months after she went missing definitely felt like a strange coincidence, and the possibility of there being a connection was looked into, but ultimately it appeared as though there was none, with investigators noting that Vicky and Sandra, quote, didn't even associate, end quote.
Were Vicky and her husband rich?
I don't know, honestly. Not
Strange
sure
that they
one
would be targeted. They get a rifle stolen with ammunition and undisclosed amount of cash.
Yeah. So then you'd wonder, like, when police said, oh, drugs weren't involved, like, why would they have all this stuff on them? I don't know. It's a very bizarre situation, but as much as you'd hope that you'd be able to, like, find some sort of connection, it really just doesn't feel like there is one. It feels like a very different, isolated incident.
Yeah, I wonder who was asking if drugs were involved, and why would they be asking that for police to come out and say drugs were not involved?
I wonder if the area where they were found was maybe, or drugs were more common around there or something.
Maybe. I don't know, but that's not the case we're talking about.
No, exactly.
No connection to Sandra's disappearance.
Correct. Now, fast forward another 2 months, and the 6-month anniversary of Sandra's disappearance, as well as Thanksgiving of 1994, rolled around. And at this time, authorities conducted another search of the Erie Canal. And I actually learned something I never knew about the canal while I was researching this case. We'd talked earlier about how Sandra often walked around there with her dog, and that area was thoroughly searched in the first days and weeks after she'd vanished. But apparently, during the fall and winter every year, the Erie Canal is totally drained.
Huh?
Isn't that wild?
Really?
I never knew that. And I was like, oh, am I just like an idiot? You know, as I'm looking at this old reporting from 1994.
I didn't know that either.
That was the first thing that popped up when I searched it.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
I honestly don't really know. I don't know if it has to do with like the weather in the area because it's like upstate New York.
Well, if it's drained, there must be some type of dam or something that they can close.
Anybody that's an expert on the Erie Canal, let us know.
Yes, please.
But due to the fact that the draining of the canal had taken place, authorities figured it would be a good time to do another flyover of the area and see if they could locate anything that might lead them to what happened to Sandra 6 months prior. The last time a search had been done in the canal was back in July when that woman had called in about the body she supposedly saw there. But again, it was full of water at the time, so you can really only see so much. Due to some issues with weather, the search of the canal ended up taking place a little bit later during the first week in December. Authorities flew overhead in a helicopter for about an hour and a half and searched a 10-mile section. But unfortunately, nothing was located during that search. Afterwards, one investigator stated, quote, "Our feeling is with all the traffic on the canal, searches by divers, and today's aerial search, we've covered it pretty well," end quote. And going back to the fact that it was around Thanksgiving, this was going to be the first major family holiday for the Servones since Sandra's disappearance, and it definitely wasn't going to be easy. And because of that, her family was planning to be apart that year, rather than all gathering at Nancy and Dominic's as they usually would. The struggling parents were planning to spend the day with their daughter Donna, but their other children would be spending the holiday elsewhere. In regards to how they were feeling about that first Thanksgiving without Sandra, quote, "Servone said she couldn't bear to spend the holiday at home with the memories of her youngest child and her 8th grandchild, who was scheduled to be born in August. She used to come over and help prepare the meal," Servone said. "She was so happy. Everybody tells me she's like me. Now that's gone. That's all gone," end quote. And sadly, at this point, the case appeared to be going cold quite fast, with investigators stating they hadn't received any new leads in months, despite investigator Bowling's dedication to the case. He'd said that he would work on it often, look into unidentified bodies that were found all over the country, and do his best to track down any lead he may have gotten, big or small. Bowling told the Democrat and Chronicle at one point, quote, "I check the teletype every day. If there's anything that could be remotely connected, we check it out," end quote. Now, between this 6-month and then the 1-year mark, the possibility of there being people of interest and suspects was discussed publicly. But authorities seem to be keeping a lot of the details regarding who those individuals might have been close to the chest. They did state, as most agencies do, that there had been several suspects on their radar, but quite a few had been ruled out during the course of their investigation during the first year or so. There were still a few people on their list that couldn't fully be ruled out, though. And as I'm sure you've guessed, Sandra's ex-husband Ralph was one of those people. And a big reason as to why was because he was allegedly one of the last people to see Sandra on the day she disappeared, and may or may not have been the father of her unborn child. There's a fair amount that we still need to talk about before we can really dive into the suspects and theories of this case, so we'll get back to this in part 2. Tune in next time where we'll discuss everything that transpired in this case starting around the 1-year anniversary. We'll be talking about the PI that ends up taking on the case in 1996, some big details that have come out in recent years, and of course, we'll talk about possible people of interest, suspects, and theories. We'll see you next time with part 2 of Sandra Sollie's case. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at WickedDeedsPod and on Twitter at WickedDeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.